started struggling with symptoms at the age of 9 or 10. I always had the flu. I had these weird ailments like joint pain, and my parents didn't really understand like what was going on. Got to a place where suicide felt like the only option, that dark.
Oh my gosh.
And I know a lot of people who deal with chronic illness get to that point because they feel hopeless because the doctors aren't listening, your parents don't have answers, they're helpless, and you feel like that's your only option or your only way out.
So first, just look at the numbers. We see about 500,000 people in the U.S. are diagnosed with Lyme disease each year. 25% of those are children.
Wow.
It's a large number. So children aged 3 to 14 are at the greatest risk of contracting Lyme's. And then this should be even more alarming, is that the number of reported Lyme disease cases more than tripled in the last 10 years.
Being able to sit here and be on a podcast would have not happened 3 years ago. So I would say we are becoming more aware. The government is understanding that there are more voices in this community that are shouting from the rooftop saying we need help. I made a decision to go through an IVF process since my risk was high and my ability to conceive was low. And through IVF, I understood that there was another option for me, and that was surrogacy. It was an area that wasn't really talked about or
Unknown.
Unknown, yes.
Yeah.
Very little unknown about it, or maybe only accessible for like the very wealthy. And I made a decision I was going to do surrogacy because that was the safest thing for my kids as a mother.
And joining us today is a very special guest, Kenzie Vath, who is a Global Lyme Alliance board member, patient advocate, and Lyme warrior, who has spent years fighting for awareness, better diagnostics, and improved treatments for Lyme disease. After over a decade of misdiagnosis and medical gaslighting, Kenzie discovered she had chronic Lyme and multiple co-infections, leading her to a relentless pursuit of answers. Now, as a key figure in Lyme advocacy, she works to educate, empower, and push for research breakthroughs that will change how Lyme is diagnosed and treated.
Kenzie, welcome to the show. This is a really nice, it's a pleasure, honestly,
Thank you
to
for
have
having
you on.
me.
And thank you for
I'm
your
honored.
advocacy. I know it's not an easy space to be a part of necessarily because a lot of people don't acknowledge, as Dr. Murray was just saying, you get gaslighted in some circles.
Very much so. I'm honored to be here and to share my story and information to help those that are suffering.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, Lyme disease is becoming a growing concern for parents, more awareness with cases rising globally. And while awareness has improved, diagnosis remains a major challenge. So symptoms often mimic other conditions, leading to misdiagnosis, confusion, and delayed treatment, especially in children. So today we'll break down the facts, risks, and what parents need to know.
And also the controversy, right, as we were saying, around chronic Lyme and potential transmission, like whether it can be passed, sexually transmitted from mother to child. I think a lot of people need to hear this. Jury's still out. But, adding to the confusion. So we're going to get through some of that and demystify it, hopefully. And, you'll help us unpack the science and share your personal journey, which I'm actually most excited for because it's enlightening. So we are excited, really, to have a Lyme advocate and survivor who's dedicated her life to awareness and better treatment. So again, welcome to the show. We always start the show off with Dr. Murray's what's sort of trending in context of the topic of the day. So without further ado, Dr. Murray, what do we have going on here in terms of how you position Lyme disease within the world of functional medicine and pediatrics?
Sure. So first, just look at the numbers. I'm sure Kenzie's very familiar with this, but we see about 500,000 people in the U.S. are diagnosed with Lyme disease each year, and 25% of those are children.
Wow.
It's a large number. So children aged 3 to 14 are at the greatest risk of contracting Lyme's. And then this should be even more alarming, is that the number of reported Lyme disease cases more than tripled in the last 10 years. So this is something that's going up like this.
That's an epidemic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So when we look at it, obviously it's a system-wide set of symptoms. That's why it's so confusing, misdiagnosis. And so it goes along with this other trend where children suffer less acute disorders these days. but at the same time, there's a rise in chronic disorders.
Right.
So we've swapped one for the other. And obviously, the chronic has a much more impact on a child's growth, development, because it goes on and on and on and on. So we have to look and sort of, this is part of what we'll unpack today, is understanding why. What's happened to children's immune system that they are more vulnerable to these chronic autoimmune disorders, which are far more severe than any acute disorder, which comes and goes and is gone. So we have to look at it in sort of the macroscopic view of, it's not just always a bug or bacteria or a virus that determines the outcome of a disorder. It's how that child's body, whole immune system, microbiome, the whole terrain of that child is able to respond, handle, and clear it out. So I think that's the big takeaway with Lyme is we can't focus on one little thing. We have to look at the big picture and understand, what it takes, what's required. And I'm sure this has been a part of your journey, Kenzie.
Yeah, it is a holistic perspective. And as a mother, even having 3 kids of my own, I think about that for each one of my kids. How are they showing up in the world? What are they being exposed to? Where are their weaknesses? What are they catching? What, supplementation are they taking? Do we need to intervene with medication? So all those factors play a role in their susceptibility.
Yeah. I like to tell my patients, the epitome of health is not whether you get sick, because we all get sick. It's the speed at which and the efficacy at which you recover, to your point earlier. And chronicity also shouldn't suggest weakness. It's a potentially confused immune system or an imbalanced immune system or a multitude of other factors that basically, like genetics, superimpose themselves so that, in this case, the host, the individual experiencing chronic disease, can no longer manage at certain intervals of their life. So in summary, there's no shaming to the experience of chronic disease here. What we're suggesting is that we want to shed light in the understanding of why some folks might be experiencing it.
Exactly.
And then what to do, right? So let's start off with your story. I mean, take us right back to ground zero.
Yeah, a rough part of my life. Started struggling with symptoms at the age of 9 or 10. It was something as easy as just catching a cold every year. I always had the flu. I had these weird ailments like joint pain, or I had this abscess tooth. And my parents didn't really understand what was going on. Then I started having issues with concentration in school. I wasn't able to retain the information. I was kind of disassociated with what was going on and what the expectations were of me. Started to develop a lot of anxiety around that. As I was getting older, I had more body aches and joint pain. A lot of doctors just called it growing pains. She's a teenager, she's a dancer, she's wearing her body thin, she's fatiguing herself, to the point where I just did not want to get out of bed and dropped into a very dark time, very dark depression, severe debilitating anxiety, couldn't get on planes, get in elevators, couldn't socialize with other teenagers or kids my age, or really anyone for that matter. Didn't even want to be around my family.
Wow.
So, got to a place where suicide felt like the only option, that dark.
Oh my gosh.
And I know a lot of people who deal with chronic illness get to that point because they feel hopeless because the doctors aren't listening, your parents don't have answers, they're helpless, and you feel like that's your only option or your only way out. And I would pray not to wake up. I just kept praying, please don't let me wake up. I don't want to go another day of suffering and not knowing why I'm suffering.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. That must have been a tremendously dark time in your life. And
so I finally got diagnosed. And I was blessed to get diagnosed. It was a God moment. But when I got my diagnosis, there was a sense of relief that I had an identity for what I was struggling with. But what people don't realize is that's just step one.
Yeah.
Tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it's just the tip of the iceberg.
And we'll talk about, sort of ways in which I think people can have establish a better diagnosis, and especially confronting a doctor who may not know. Don't stop your efforts to getting properly diagnosed. That's the objective.
Yeah. No, in my experience, there's very, very few, comparatively, doctors who are really, really knowledgeable about Lyme. So, first step is finding a doctor who has a wealth of experience, and then you can start navigating.
Let's talk about
Right.
the primary vector, right, which is not the only one. But what we're looking up on screen here is at the various life cycles of a tick, typically a deer tick, but there's other forms of ticks. You encounter these in forests and in wooded areas, primarily in North America along the northeastern seaboard, but they're everywhere now. And this epidemic is, largely born out of the transmission of what these guys carry, which is Borrelia burgdorferi, spirochete bacteria that's lodged into their abdomen that when they bite you, they release in their spit, to make it overly simplified.
Yeah.
But they're not the only vector. But part and parcel to this message is, make sure if you're walking in wooded areas that you cover up. I'm not a huge fan of, massive amounts of DEET necessarily.
Right.
But that is what what are your thoughts on that? Just
Just looking at this picture, you have to realize how small these little creatures are. Yeah. So something the size of a poppy seed can completely change your life in less than a second. When ticks bite, you don't feel them bite. I want everybody to be very clear. Unlike a bee that stings you, you've been, stung. And ticks don't just hold Lyme disease. They hold a lot of different bacteria in them, a lot of co-infections. Thank you. And that's very important, because the combination of what's in their saliva and what they're transmitting into the human is a factor that has to be, taken into consideration. When you're bit, or if you are one of the fortunate few that realize you've been bit by a tick, there is a common myth that Lyme disease creates as a bullseye rash. This is an immediate, recognition that you've been infected by Lyme. But the majority of people that have bit by ticks that carry Lyme disease do not present a bullseye rash. In addition, these ticks kind of hide in these very dark crevices of the body, belly buttons, behind the ear, in the hairline, places where you're not going to normally check or see a rash if one to appear.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very good points. My own daughter was bitten by a tick, happened to be in the panhandle of southern Florida, and or the southern panhandle of Florida. And it was incredibly faint. So this was a starry tick, by the way. There's various types of tick. So this wasn't a deer tick. There are some deers in the area that the crocodiles have their way with, I'm sure. But we don't know where this came from. But it was a very, very faint presentation. Only because I was extremely educated on the matter was I able to question, maybe this is. Had her tested, brought to Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, where I'm based, and it was positive. And we got her into very early intervention, so she was fine. But not everyone's that lucky. And only, I believe the stats are somewhere around 50% that you would even produce any form of a bullseye lesion. Which, by the way, you're looking at here in a bullseye, of course, is that centrality. The tick is no longer there, but you've got the red margins, and they expand outward, and that's part of the immune system's response. But only 50% of people present this way. You don't have a recollection yourself of actually
Unfortunately,
seeing a bullseye rash.
No, I never. My parents don't recognize the bullseye rash. They don't even recognize, being bit by a tick prior. And my dad's from Michigan. My mom's from California. And even both of them were very little awareness around Lyme disease.
Right.
So, you just very, very well expressed, the anxiety, the confusion, the depression, all of those things that you went through until you got the understanding of this was Lyme's disease. But then from there, obviously you're a mother now. You have many healthy children. So tell us about how you went from that stage through conceiving, pregnancy, having children, and all of the considerations that you made to make that successful.
Yeah. God had a part of it, and I didn't believe that at the time. When my husband and I decided we were going to get married, at that time, I didn't really want kids for a number of reasons, personal ones. But then when we made that decision that we were going to start a family, I got very nervous because during my journey with Lyme disease, and it was 10 years of treatment and intervention treatment, I've had 3 PICC lines, I've taken thousands of supplements. I mean, very invasive treatment. And when we made the decision to have a child, I knew that this was an infectious disease, and I was very terrified of that. And so I decided to dive a little bit deeper into that and understand what my risks were of having a child. I went to a few fertility doctors to just also get a baseline of where my body was at. Was I healthy enough to have a child? I've had chronic illness the majority of my life, and does this put me at risk of stressing my body? The top fertility doctors in the area, I live in Orange County, California, so they're pretty well.
Very good doctors.
Very good doctors, that's right. We got Newport, top doctors. They were very skeptical of me getting pregnant, number one, just based on their baseline knowledge of hormones and the ability to do so, on top of their very little awareness around Lyme, but knowing it was not going to help the journey.
Yep.
So I made a decision to go through an IVF process since my risk was high and my ability to conceive was low. And through IVF, I understood that there was another option for me, and that was surrogacy. At the time, I've never heard of surrogacy. I think if it was popular, it was very, it was an area that wasn't really talked about. Or
unknown.
Unknown, yes.
Yeah.
Very little unknown about it, or maybe only accessible for like the very wealthy. Right. And I made a decision I was going to do surrogacy because that was the safest thing for my kids as a mother. And so I did that. I had an amazing surrogate experience. IVF and retrieving my eggs was one of the most difficult things I did. It did exacerbate my Lyme, and it did come back, and I had to go through rounds of treatment to get back to a baseline. And I mean baseline is like I can get up in the morning, I can feed myself, I can brush my teeth, I can take a shower, and I can do a baseline work hourly, right? So I went through the surrogacy experience. My first 2 kids I had through surrogacy, and then miraculously I got pregnant naturally, and it really truly was a miracle. I had a very difficult pregnancy. There was a lot of concern about contraction for my child, and I am very hyper aware of his symptoms and his development even today. Even the smallest little thing that he may do different or may not hit on the development chart, my motherly fear is what if? But I do everything I can to educate my children about Lyme disease. They are very aware, even though we live in Southern California and people have said to me, Lyme doesn't exist here. That is completely false fact. And it does exist. And my kids are at parks and they're playing in the grass. And because it's Southern California, they wear shorts and flip-flops. And they have to be aware of, there's doom lurking in the grass or in the woods, and having animals, bringing animals in your house, they can also be a factor of transmitting bugs into the house and potentially being bit by a tick. So education is the foundation, and watching my kids and knowing that if something feels off, I'm going to research and I'm going to figure out an answer.
I'm just in that context, I'm just going to bring up a heat map, by the way. What we're looking at here is a CDC distribution of Lyme disease by county across the U.S. And so, Lyme, of course, do have different species, and there's lack of exposures perhaps or less in the centrality and the Midwest, but there is exposures of certain species in the West Coast. As I mentioned, the heat map is extreme in the Northeast, and even down here, as I mentioned, my own daughter was contracted in the Panhandle here in Florida. But no, it's an epidemic because of this vector of tick, and the controversy, maybe not so much the jury's maybe still out, but is whether or not this is sexually transmitted. And so kudos to you for even understanding it at that time and being proactive about it. I heard what you said about your experience when you were trying to express eggs in order for the IVF treatment process. In that process, there are drugs like Clomid and things that are given. And the interesting thing is, and I just thought I'd share a clinical anecdote here in my own practice, what I observed. When you give a patient a medication, such as Clomid or birth control pill, then you fluctuate their hormones and they are themselves a carrier. What's interesting is what we see is this sort of spikes or pushes estrogen up, among other things. And estrogen in high doses can be very pro-inflammatory for some people. There's genetic variances here, right? But to make this super simple, we found a cohort of young women, late teens, early 20s, that came and presented with Lyme disease. At least they suspected they had Lyme disease. We saw, and we'll get into this, the testing that they did by, I believe, one of the best labs out there, IGeneX. And they were positive indeed for Lyme titers, which means their immune systems has seen the bacteria that we're talking about in question. But the more important thing is you don't diagnose labs, you diagnose the patient. And they had the criteria, which we'll talk about. In fact, I'll pull up a chart right now as it relates to what those symptoms look like in early versus chronic Lyme. We'll talk about this. But they definitely had the symptoms of chronic Lyme. So what was interesting in this cohort was not so much what we gave these people, but what we took away. What we took away was their birth control pill, and they got better. They resolved. The birth control pill ultimately shifted their hormones and pushed them over the top
Of the estrogen.
And expressed, I believe, with some predispositions genetically, the chronicity of Lyme. So let's just go through this real quick, and then we'll come back to the advocacy component of this, because it's really important for people to understand that there are solutions here. You don't have to live with the chronicity, but the early symptomatology that you were describing, largely for you, it's different for everybody, was this joint pain, muscle pain. You described this being in a cognitive issue as well, right? Mental distress and depression. But the chronicity, because of where this bacteria goes into the joints, into the fascia, is fatigue, joint pain, muscle pain, sleep issues, right? Neuropathies, even heart. There's heart Lyme, right?
Yeah, I was going to say Lyme carditis. That is a really important factor too, because many people who are infected with Lyme carditis, they'll have damage to the heart tissue, or arrhythmia or issues with that, and neurological Lyme, you have Lyme that really impacts your basic abilities to function.
Yeah.
In my
Right.
Fatigue alone is that thing. It's like if you can't get out of bed and you can't do your daily expectation of either showing up for school or going to work, it's debilitating.
Absolutely. We're talking with Kenzie Vath, Lyme disease author, advocate, survivor, Global Lyme Alliance board member. Tell us a little bit about your vision and mission around educating folks through the Global Lyme Alliance.
Yeah, I made a decision to start doing advocacy work pretty young through my journey, because I felt that there was a piece missing from my own experience, and that piece was education. And so I'm very passionate about sharing and getting people to become aware of how debilitating this illness can be. So I joined the Global Lyme Alliance after a few years of continuing to press them to have me join their board. I got the opportunity to do so. I wrote a book called The Ignored Pandemic, Real Stories of Lyme Disease, and I really wanted to get it out there to the masses. So as I was their honoree at the gala and raised it was actually the largest fundraising in the history of GLA the year I was an honoree. And I gave a book to every single attendee, almost 500 people, because I really wanted them to walk away with a handbook of answers, or at least getting them curious about this chronic illness. My mission with GLA is not only to increase our awareness of the organization and the disease, but also the succession planning, because we know that the cases are only going to rise. And we know this for many factors, not
as
just—
we saw before.
Yes, not just because of the ticks. And I feel 500,000 is grossly underestimated. And this is also, this is global. I want to highlight, bold that word, because this is not just in the United States.
Right.
We probably have more information in the United States around Lyme disease than the rest of the world. And in some countries, it's completely ignored. You can't Google Lyme. You can't get articles about Lyme. You can't get any research or other on Lyme. And they completely ignore the fact that you can be dealing with this severe chronic illness. So I am very much an advocate, not just for those that are suffering here in the United States or here in Orange County or the epidemic centers of New York and other, but I am fighting for those globally around the world, and I want that to be impacting for them.
So, Kenzie, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Could you tell us how and when you started thinking about this?
Yes.
And putting it into paper, and then what you've included in the book?
I do want to start off that I was not very good in English and was told I'd probably do nothing with this. So I'm very proud that I am now an author of 3 books, but I am all about the passion and storytelling of a book. So I knew I had to do advocacy work, as I mentioned, and I wanted a tool to give as a gift because I had so many people flooding my Instagram asking me for advice and where to go and what to do. So I decided to work on this piece of art for them so I could give it as a gift. And my focus was to break the book up into a few different sections. One, just learning about Lyme. What is Lyme? Lyme 101, so to speak. And then the second piece was the storytelling, because people realize when they can align with someone's personal story, they figure out answers for themselves and they don't feel alone in their journey, especially dealing with chronic illness. So I went out to seek people to share their story with me through an interview style. And I had people from all over the world. I did want to focus on a global perspective, not just a United States one. I interviewed people from Canada, Ireland, Netherlands, all over. Even, I forgot the one. Well, I'll come back to it. I had one interview with a lady who the interview was completely in Spanish and I had to have it translated, which was amazing. Argentina. So I really wanted to take a global perspective and really have these stories align with those that are suffering. And then at the end, I did a fun, very kitschy fun thing. I created a playlist that you can download with a QR code, and it's the favorite songs from all those that I interviewed to get them through their Lyme journey, because we know music is very healing, right, when it comes to illness. And so I put this playlist together as well as a space for them to share their own story for those that didn't make it in the book. But I was a real person, and it took amazing effort, interviews in the middle of the night for India, to interviews at the crack of dawn. Managing the time zones alone was an art. So.
And in the book, you talk about how it takes years for some to get diagnosed, and physically you feel betrayed by your own body. We heard you talk about that earlier. Mentally, you fight battles others will never get to see. Bring it back to how Lyme disease, you believe anyways, affects pregnancy, fetal development, maybe some, again, jury's still out, notions around congenital Lyme, and whether Lyme can be passed from mother to child, in your opinion.
Yeah, my opinion is the research strongly suggests that there could be transmission. And we have to consider if a mother has active infection, active Lyme within her body on the means of being pregnant, how does that get transferred? They're sharing the same body, they're sharing blood exchange. How are those Lyme spirochetes interacting with the child's development and ultimately their long-term immune system? So I do think it's something to ponder. And I hope that we put more money into researching and having proof that this is the case. In 1985, Dr. McDonald found proof that Lyme bacteria was present in a stillborn fetal. And I do think that is something that really persuaded or gave me the gut reaction that I need to seek alternative means of having children. So I want, obviously, more research out there to present more proof. This is a bit dated, but fascinating that it took place that long ago.
Sure.
I want to point out, as I sort of teased earlier, IGeneX, IGENEX. It's a lab. I think they've got it right. In fact, what we're looking at is their front website page at igenics.com, and this whole dissertation on Lyme disease in children, which is the latest advancements in diagnosing and treating and testing. And you can watch this incredible presentation. And the association, actually, they're bringing up with PANS and PANDAS and autoimmunity and so forth. It's wonderful stuff by Dr. Joseph and Dr. Nancy, and these guys are worthwhile watching, along with the book in hand, by the way, by Kenzie. You got to get that book. But I wanted to establish what you had spoken about earlier, and acknowledge this is not just about a lab test diagnoses. Yes, we can get the right testing done, and I think it's them. But what establishes a healthy immune system, both in mom and newborn, infant? Bring us through that. It's really important to understand this from a holistic perspective.
So I'll just start with the caveat where, mid-1800s, there was Louis Pasteur, the germ theory of disease, which has sort of carried on into this current age as the predominant model. At the same time, there's another, biologist, Antoine Béchamp, also French, who said, no, it's not the germ, it's not the bacteria, it's not the virus, it's your body's terrain, your body's capacity to regulate itself, to defend itself, to overcome whatever challenges come along. So from that context, now we jump to today, and we know 80% of the immune system is wrapped around the intestinal tract, large intestine, small intestine. 80% of the lymph nodes, the headquarters, the stations for the immune system are there. What are they? Why are they there? Because of the microbiome. That's where the internal body reacts with the external world. Food comes in, that's our pathway. So the immune system is positioned there to take care of that. If that system, the microbiome, starts drifting off in terms of not the right ecology, other, yeast, bacteria, things that come in there that are not contributing to our health, that are not making metabolites, making vitamins for us, making, immune regulators, then we start losing our capacity to respond to whatever comes along, whether it's Lyme's, another virus, another bacteria. So ultimately, we have to come back to where is our immune system seated? What's the foundation of that immune system from the moment we're born and the umbilical cord is cut and that baby's operating on their own? And the starting point is the microbiome, the health of the intestinal tract. So if we start there, looking at that, that's one way of also helping. It's like a starting point of looking at the root cause of what we can do to overcome any sort of immune dysregulation.
In your awareness of, and that's brilliantly said, by the way, it's the host, not the disease typically, and we've learned this from our forefathers, and the whole notion around the health of the whole body, and again, the way I look at this is from largely the lens of genetic predisposition. That's just my area of interest, and we all have different predispositions genetically. Our ability to manage external viral, bacterial exposures, the GALT that we're born into the world with, the gut-associated lymphoid tissue you're alluding to, our exposure to mom's bacteria, the vaginal tract through natural birthing, breast milk, and even the skin to skin. But where I'm going with that is, DNA is a very interesting area. Genetics, you can't change your DNA. But the interesting thing is you can manage genetic expression. So it's not futile. So it doesn't matter what genes you're born with. Environment probably counts for a lot more.
Oh, we know a lot more.
Right. And so, and there's hope out there. But preventive measures, for expectant mothers who themselves may have Lyme, do you encourage is a strong word. Do you suggest that women that are either pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant look into surrogacy as well, or what are your typical teachings in this area, or what did your book talk about as it relates to that?
Yeah, I didn't dive too much into the expecting journey, right? Of being a mother and carrying my kids. It felt like it was a different track. I really focused on the teen years, the impact of mental health that Lyme had on me. I have no idea if either of my parents have been exposed or have Lyme. I'm assuming they have been exposed, but I'd be curious to see if that was even a case. I would say a mother's intuition and instinct of their personal journey is very strong. And if women would just pause and listen to what they think is best for their body and their child, they usually know the answer.
Oh, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to seek it through alternative means.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
A large part of our listeners have young kids, and it turns out, and this is really where we want to educate them, a large majority of children incidence, anyways, of Lyme disease is in the 5 to 14-year-olds. So the latter part of our 0 to 7, the first 7 years here. But I just want to point out a few statistics in that category. 300,000 and probably more diagnosed each year, but that 25% of new Lyme diseases are in children. We talked about that already with the stats you brought up, Dr. Murray. 50% are common tests your children receives as the doctor misses Lyme is 30 to 50%. So that's where the testing comes in. Yeah. So genes don't dictate everything. Yeah. Tests don't dictate everything. Yeah. It's important that you understand what symptoms your child's bringing along. Regardless of any and all of this, though, what can we do about the microbiome, the gut? What can we do about the immune system? How can we fortify it through diet, lifestyle, supplementation? Because at the end of the day, I do believe, and I think we believe here the first 7 years, it's not just the virus or bug, it's the host. How do we enhance and empower the immune system, no matter what age and stage?
It's the playing field. It's the internal terrain. Yeah. So, number one, obviously, diet is the number one factor in a healthy microbiome. And if we look at that, we can break it down simply into sort of understandable terms. What makes a healthy microbiome is prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. So these are the bugs that live with us symbiotically. They're helping us, we're helping them. There's actually more of them than the cells in our body. So they have to be the good guys, otherwise things get out of balance. But food, prebiotics is fiber. So we have to look healthy foods. All of the vegetables, all of the fruits contain fiber. If a child is not getting all of those foods, they're not getting the fiber, that's the food for the probiotics to live on. Probiotics will be disbalanced, they can't do their work, and then we don't get postbiotics, which more and more research are hugely involved in immune regulation. So the prebiotics are there for us, for the probiotics. Probiotics are helping us metabolize vitamins, taking care of everything else. The postbiotics are this key where there's still a lot of research, but they're the ones that have the capacity to immune regulate many different pathways. So microbiome comes back to food. Clean food, organic food, lots of fiber, whole foods, and as we talk about often, the whole rainbow, the colors of all the foods. Then you get all of the different carotenoids, polyphenols. You're getting everything that our microbiome needs to function and grow properly.
And sometimes we can't eat ourselves to a therapeutic range. I mean, I know this is always a challenge. I've got 2 kids myself. They're older now, but forcing into them 7. And by the way, the lowest end of what the federal government recommends is 7 servings of both fruits and vegetables, half a cup of every color of the rainbow. No, not every kid's going to get that in every day. So it's a challenge to eat ourselves to therapeutic range. So in terms of supplementation, before you give us the answer, I'm interested in, Kenzie, what have you supplemented your children on, particularly by the one that was naturally birthed and where you're concerned and always cognizant about their immune system?
Yeah, I think range is important, and I do want to point out that I'm very fortunate to be able to access good food for my kids. Not everybody has that, ability. I would say when it came to supplementation, from infancy, if I wasn't breastfeeding, I was doing goat milk. I looked at alternative means, to provide high fats at that stage before going into, supplementations like gummies or other supplements. But I also gave my kids kombucha. They were exposed at a very young age. There's probably some controversy around that of, is that safe? I think it depends on the mother. You know, if they're monitoring it and they're watching it, it's good quality, doesn't have a ton of extra sugar added to it. Baking things fresh too. Kids love sweets, let's be honest. They love sugar. There are alternative, healthier options to sugar, as natural as possible, and making these recipes in your home, you know, fresh breads instead of getting the institutional breads that have a ton of additives, even the gluten-free options. Our house is gluten-free, dairy-free, no artificial sugars, no seed oils. We're very mindful. It's not cheap to live that way, but I think it's going to be much cheaper than dealing with the chronic illness down the road.
It's
Absolutely.
way cheaper in the long run.
Are you dosing your kids with anything supplementally? Are you giving them additional vitamin D? I know we live in sunny California here, but are we...
I do. Well, in vitamin D, that's a tough one, right? Because it's like you're supposed to have as much skin exposed to the sun to get the full, you know, dose of vitamin D.
No
but
one
then,
does.
well, that too. And I'm like, I don't want you fully exposed because then there's ticks outside if you're laying on the grass. So, yes, I do. I use Juice Plus products. We do probiotics. We go to a functional medicine doctor. I also use tinctures, like herbal tinctures, and my kids drink tea, like just straight up, good quality, organic tea. I try to minimize too many supplements because, again, to your point earlier that you referenced, sometimes taking things out is helpful too.
Yeah.
I want their bodies to just grow. The body is working a lot right now. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 2-year-old. Every day, I mean, it's putting so much energy into just growing their little bodies that less in their body is sometimes better, but just ensuring it's a bit more of a holistic approach to what they're consuming and what they're absorbing is key. I'm watching their bowel movements. I'm watching their hydration. I'm making sure just the base necessary things are there for them and they're consistent with those. And also exposure to things. We have animals, so I want them to kind of be exposed to build that immunity as well.
That's brilliant. I love it, and kudos to you for being so cognizant and aware. You've got some lucky children. Dr. Murray, bring us through, though, you've already alluded to some of the diet and lifestyle side of things, but the supplemental advantage, again, in each sort of stage, 0 to 2, 4, 5, and 6, 7. What can parents start to do at an early age as it relates to the beyond diet?
Sure. So again, the perspective, the understanding, the playing field is really important to understand. And when we look at how much this world has changed in the last 30, 40 years, especially the environment, we realize that most children are being born into this world with a higher toxic load than ever before in human history. Pesticides, plastics, heavy metals, other chemicals. So inevitably, if we're living in a civilized, industrialized country and city, those are in the environment, the food, the air, the water. So we can minimize those as much as possible. But from my experience and my perspective is that if we don't do something to help a child's body neutralize, detoxify, and eliminate them, then that's another burden to the immune system, another burden to the hormonal system, another burden to the brain. Yeah. So then we start looking at supplements, how we give that therapeutic edge to the healthy diet of what we're providing. So for me, even the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends vitamin D3 from the moment of birth. It's just there's a global deficiency for many reasons. So vitamin D3 from birth, and then when a child or a baby starts eating solid food, 6, 7 months, then we can think about supplementing and looking at their whole situation. So then when we start supplementing, whether it's 6 months, 1 year, 1.5, 2 years, we think about the sort of the core 4. So number 1, a broad spectrum multivitamin mineral, where you get all the essential vitamins and all the essential minerals. Number 1. Those are the building blocks. That's why they're called essential, since 1941. Then we look at what the brain requires, because the brain is growing the most in those first 7 years. By 7 years old, it's 95% of the adult brain. So it's all made of fat. So we have to give them the right fats to make the right brain. And the right fat is the omega-3 DHA, cod liver oil, the best source.
Which also, interestingly, still plays a big role in the immune system.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, anti-inflammatory in many, many ways. And then, for me, the key antioxidant, the one that helps the immune system and also helps detox environmental burdens, vitamin C. It's still the number one for all of that spectrum of use. And then following that, so we've got the vitamin D3, we've got the multivitamin, we've got the vitamin C, and then we're looking at the DHA for the cod liver oil for the brain.
It's hard to get all that stuff out of diet alone, again, especially at those ranges are going to advantage a child therapeutically. And I just want to drive that home again. It's very difficult to get any and all of these things out of diet alone, especially if you don't have access to some of the highest quality foods. What were some of the biggest hurdles in your Lyme disease advocacy to date? In terms of getting the message out there, do you feel like a message falls on deaf ears, or I don't know, my kid doesn't play in the forest, so they're not going to get a tick bite, or not recognizing this for maybe what it is, and not properly getting diagnosed, or any or all of those things?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, just the lack of awareness and the urgency around this issue was immediate. You could see it even just sharing with, my family, hey, I have Lyme disease and this is something you need to be careful of. Unless you're impacted by it, you really are, ignorance is bliss. Mm-hmm. It doesn't exist. It won't impact me. I've heard otherwise. The information out there, I think, not only could be potentially misleading, but I think is very inaccurate in sense that Lyme disease doesn't discriminate. Anybody can get this illness. And I feel for this podcast particularly, people may be asking, well, why are kids at the highest risk of this? And the truth is because they're outside. They're playing outside. They're exposing their bodies to the elements. They're rolling around in leaves. They're hiking without, high socks and full coverage, and they are the exposed population. Their bodies are susceptible to more incoming, especially if they're not on healthy diets, they're not getting the right sleep. They're going to be susceptible to getting chronic illness. Yeah. And it's important to note that Lyme, when contracted, you can eradicate right away if caught. That doesn't happen for the majority of the cases. Mm-hmm. And chronic illness, to this date of my understanding, there is no cure for it. There's treatment options, and we're seeking alternative options to eradicate Lyme in this country and hopefully others, but there is no cure. So it's something these children, like myself at the time when I was probably first infected, to where I am today, it is part of my daily life, dealing with it. And I want people to be aware of that. Chronic means long term.
Yeah. You've been involved in building a biobank to support Lyme disease research. Tell us all about that. What is a biobank? How's it helping advance diagnostics? And what impact do you think it might even have in future Lyme treatment?
Yeah, so this is led by Dr. Liz Negrovich, and the biobank is really there for pediatric research, right? So the bank is present to be able to utilize these samples to understand more about how Lyme is impacting the youth. So I think this is going to be really big for those out there in the research field that need access to samples. It's not easy to find people with Lyme, probably because most of them don't think they have it, or they've been misdiagnosed with something else like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, MS, when really they have Lyme or they have underlying infection, right? Because Lyme is just one of the many co-infections and tick-borne illnesses out there.
Right.
So I just want to be clear to that as well. So this will be really transformative for those researchers out there. And the Global Lyme Alliance is really focused on funding that research so we can get better answers, not only for diagnostics, as you mentioned before, IGeneX, which to many people, they aren't able to even access IGeneX to get tested. In the state of New York, you can't use IGeneX.
Very restricted.
Right?
For that matter, a lot of other tests.
Yes.
Yes.
New York.
Yes, New York, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's expensive. So a lot of people who might have symptoms or be curious or consider Lyme, they're not going to be able to access IGeneX as an option to really get further testing. And as you know, it's 2 different tests that you have to take plus symptomology to get a really clear definition of Lyme diagnosis. So we definitely need better testing out there. There is no doubt about it. In terms of treatment, almost every LLMD, which is a Lyme literate medical doctor, treats Lyme differently. Some are using antibiotics, some are using methylene blue, some are using herbology. I think there's probably some credit for all and in between, going back to holistic approach. But each individual person is going to respond differently to that treatment.
Sure.
So I think that is a huge piece too, is the efficacy and the necessary need for accurate treatment protocols, and then eventually, hopefully, a cure. So we have at GLA what we say, a world free of Lyme. We don't want Lyme to exist. And the reason I do so much work in the research side, because the research that we're really investing in and putting our dollars in is not going to benefit me at this time. I have chronic Lyme. I'm past the threshold of being able to treat myself any more than I know now. But what we're looking at is for my kids' generation, how can they be preventative against this chronic illness?
Great work. Great work.
I want to
Thank
point
you.
out the ILADS for a moment here, the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. I believe that if you're looking for a Lyme literate doctor, this is the criteria to follow. I think that they've got no one has everything right. So besides your incredible organization, the Global Lyme Alliance, and the advocacy you're doing there, combining that with interest in the Lyme Disease Biobank, which is advancing faster than convention perhaps would on the matter. But landing here for folks to understand criteria as a trusted source, getting tested with IGeneX if you can afford it.
Yes.
I think these are all great resources. This is a topic that is so deep and rich, and there's no way we've just scratched the surface, can't cover everything.
It's true.
I also just wanted to point out, and some things that I heard you say throughout the segment today. Most of us walk around this planet with some degree of chronicity, and our children are born into a world of very, multitude of complex, illnesses and transmissions and, environmental challenges with a multitude of exposures to, I've heard you say this before, hundreds and hundreds of new chemicals every year, thousands that are out there, tens of thousands that are out there. So we're never going to get away with being disease-free. It's how to manage the immune system. It's how to stay healthy with an appropriate diet, exercise, lifestyle, and supplementation. I think that's what we really want to drive home. Epstein-Barr virus, mononucleosis. Your kid's going to be exposed to it.
Sure.
Cytomegalovirus, they're going to be exposed. Herpes simplex, they're going to be exposed. It's not about being exposed. Even, I believe, with Lyme, it's how ultimately the body manages it in context of that. So I believe this truly, and it's in the literature, in fact. Most of us walk around with Lyme titers. That is to say, just like my daughter, just like yourself, we've been exposed to it. Now it's how do we
respond,
tame the immune system?
Right.
How do we respond? How do we do whatever
Build
we can?
the
Because
body's
you are the epitome of health. You look, you know what I mean?
You're very sweet.
Well, no, but I mean,
Thank
you look, but and I get the challenge, and
It's
I
a
get
lot of work.
right. Well, and so look, being healthy is not easy. It is.
Amen.
Health is an investment, never an expense, and so anything you can do to invest in your health, it's the one thing I think.
I also think it's a choice.
Yeah.
A lot of people, it's easy to take the choice of not eating healthy or going down an addictive behavior path. It's a choice of knowing that I want to be here to see my grandkids grow up, because I could easily make the choice to not to wake up early, disrupt my sleep, eat terrible, don't take supplements, smoke, drink, whatever it may be, which I do like a glass of wine here and there. But it's really about making the choice to choose health first, because I know my body is a little bit weaker than some others, and I need to do a little extra work to maintain.
Absolutely. We got a lot of viewer questions on the show, and social media interaction. I'm gonna get you to answer the first one here, some of which we've been through, but we've got somebody from Instagram asking, I've heard Lyme bacteria can go dormant and then come back years later. Is that true? How does that happen? That's a deep question. I love that question. What's your take on that?
Okay, so I'll give you my interpretation. Yes, I do believe that is true. That happened to me twice, where my Lyme went dormant. And what does dormant mean? It really just means not fully activated in the body. These bugs are extremely smart. And if we are not considering them as something that can truly disrupt us, we are very ignorant and naive. Just like the gut bacteria can dysregulate our emotional center and how we think and how our brain operates, because I think there's a whole microbiome in the brain itself and all the bacteria in there. Lyme can do the same. So when Lyme goes dormant, it's hiding out because it knows it's being attacked. Just like if you were normally, war was out, there was a war outbreak, you're going to go hide in your home. That's what Lyme's doing. It's hiding, and it can hide very well. Because of its spirochete nature, it can get deep into the cell where a lot of antibiotics can't go.
It's like a corkscrew, right? Like
It
we're
is a
looking up on
corkscrew.
screen here.
Yes,
if
it's
it
a
gets into
corkscrew.
your joints and it's not treated early, that's where it's going to hide out. And furthermore, create biofilm, which is a protective layer against our immune system to be able to kill it off and defend it. So if it goes dormant, this is an analogy I like to use. It's nowhere near the same disease, but tuberculosis, people walk around with it and it's walled off. It's in the lungs and it's in jail if you have a healthy and robust immune system. When that immune system becomes depressed with poor sleep, poor diet, unhealthy lifestyle, etc., it will come out and play. The same with Lyme.
And
So again,
stress is a big factor.
Yes.
Stress is a big factor of that, right? And good stress and bad stress. And from my understanding, the body doesn't really know the difference between the good and the bad. I remember my Lyme reactivating just trying to plan my wedding. And I was like, wait a minute, this isn't the time, this isn't the place. But being mindful of our stress levels and managing that is a key piece too.
Yeah, so I think a big part of the dormancy is actually the immune system getting on top. And if it stays on top, then, we have dormancy. If something comes along that disrupts that immune regulation, then the opportunity is for that spirochete to come out again and rise up. So,
Well, here's another perfect example. 1 in 3 Americans, North Americans, have cold sores, which is the herpes family. We get stressed. Maybe it's the wedding. Maybe it's lack of sleep or drinking excessively. Whatever that stress is, physical, mental, emotional, that cold sore popping out, that is in your spine. It comes out to play when your body is under stress, not getting the nutrients it needs, etc. So it's not, this is all about keeping the immune system intact, right? To your point, no matter what the virus or bacteria. What else do we have?
We've got, this is from Outdoors Dad. If my child gets a tick bite, should I get them tested immediately or wait for symptoms?
Do not wait for symptoms. It can take too long to get symptoms. First, you need to remove the tick. If you find the tick, remove it and remove it correctly. There is a right way, and there is a tool out there. So if you're an outdoor dads, if you're outdoor with your kids, you should be carrying this tool or at least have it on hand at home. Yep, thank you.
A multitude of them.
Tick checks. So getting that tool to be able to remove the tick, and then keep the tick in a Ziploc bag because you can send it in for testing.
To see the species.
I actually think that's the best way because when you're testing, you're only testing
the source.
Yeah, you're testing the source, right? So you don't know what they're potentially exposed to. If you can test the tick, then you know the direct exposure. And treat according to the tick. So save the tick, put it in a bag, send it off for testing. And I would also keep a very close eye on your children. It doesn't always present as flu-like symptoms.
Right.
Sometimes it can present as other things as well. And so, getting tested, being proactive is the number one thing.
Great.
Excellent. And we've got a question about herxing. This is vernacular, common to the Lyme community. They all know what it is. So this person's read about herxing during Lyme treatment, and what is it, and how can you manage it? It's a loaded question, I know, but did you experience it? What is it, first of all, for folks? And
So herxing is a die-off reaction, right? So
Herxheimer, it's an eponym, isn't it?
Herxheimer reaction. Yeah. Thank you. Herxing is a die-off reaction. It commonly occurs when you're going through treatment for Lyme, especially in the allopathic treatment protocols, such as antibiotics. You can take antibiotics orally, or in my case, I had IV antibiotics, and I definitely herxed. I was getting much worse before I ever got better. Yeah. And it does play a mental, it plays this trick in your mind of, is this working? And is this going to help me? Or am I just getting worse? Yeah. So that die-off reaction, you really have to manage. I did that through journaling. So tracking my medications and then what my herxing was from, because I took a slew, like 4 or 5 different antibiotics. Each of them had a different type of herxing. Anything from feeling like I was crazy in my head is a herx. It's not like I'm jerking or like flailing. That's not, I mean, that could be one of the reactions too. Yeah. But there are other ways to herx. Rashes, symptoms getting worse, not being able to move the body, a little bit of paralyzation. I had that. I had one day where I couldn't lift my arms. I couldn't lift my body up. So tracking that, journaling it, knowing when it's connected to what you're taking, and that even goes for herbs as well.
Yes.
And you manage it by, consulting with your LLMD and also being an advocate for yourself. If you know that something continues to make you worse and you don't see any relief from that, I would question it. Sure. I would ask and get feedback.
And sometimes it's just about pacing it, going at the right pace, in terms of how you can manage it, how your body can eliminate at the same speed that the die-off is occurring. Yeah. I think the Herxheimer first came along, when Candida became a big problem. And people would take antifungals, the Candida would die off, and you get these Herxheimer, basically toxification.
Yeah, kind of like detox in a way. Yeah. Not always a bad thing for sure, but it does, like you suggested, give insights to tempering the protocol, one way or another. I want everyone to pick up your book, but I have to make mention also to Dr. Richard Horowitz's book. It's still one of my favorites. I have it on my desk side in my clinical practice. For a while we took special interest in Lyme, but Why Can't I Get Better? Solving the Mystery of Lyme and Chronic Disease by Dr. Richard Horowitz. I think it was a New York Times best-selling book as well. One of the best ones out there. There's so much here.
There really is.
And I think that getting tested is key. I think the IGeneX test. There's also a Vibrant Wellness tick-borne 2-panel. I think that people could look into. But I think if we were to sort of start to wrap this up, I would suggest getting super simple here and saying one tip. Would be if you feel like your child of any age, 0 through 7 and beyond, has unexplained fatigue, joint pain, mood disorders, mood changes, executive function change, cognitive issues, just anything unexplained, consider Lyme as a possible cause, especially if they spend time outdoors, right? So many of these cases are misdiagnosed. We've seen the stats. We've heard it from Dr. Murray. Behavioral, neurological, whatever it might be. If you're confused, consider Lyme. And if symptoms persist, particularly seek advanced Lyme testing. What are the
I was just going to add, through Global Lyme Alliance, we also have a list of preferred LLMDs as well. So if you're seeking a doctor and you don't feel that you're getting the answers from your traditional medical doctor or a pediatrician, you can go through our website and get a referral, as well as we have patient care advocacy. So those moms who, and it is many moms, so I will generalize in a minute here, those moms who are really trying to care for their children who are chronically ill and have Lyme disease, we have coaches and advocates that can help you through that journey, because more of that journey is the mental health journey of I'm just trying to do everything. I'm so fatigued. I'm so tired. I'm getting up and I'm the caretaker. So we are there to help support those that are caring for their children with Lyme.
That's great.
Beautiful.
No, I think, key takeaways, Lyme's is the great masquerader. So the symptoms can be physical, they can be emotional, they can be mental. So we have to understand from that perspective, any of those fields, it may be part of this and part of that, but physical, mental, and emotional, then any of those symptoms, it's worth being aware that your child may have been exposed, may be suffering. So look into it.
Right. And if anybody gets a diagnosis or is really considering this might be something impacting their child or themselves, you can check out our podcast too with Lyme Plus, and that's a plus sign.
Yeah.
And we really dive deep into Lyme. And we talk about it from various angles, from the researcher perspective to a physician's perspective, all the way from the patient perspective. Because I think understanding and aligning your story to someone else's is also part of just knowing that you're not alone through this chronic illness.
Absolutely.
Great.
Hard question to answer, but as we wrap, the advancements are just tremendous, which is the good news story of the day in research. But in your opinion, looking ahead to those treatments, what gives you the most hope, for better diagnoses and recovery?
I think immediately my hope comes from the continued awareness around this illness. Being able to sit here and be on a podcast would have not happened 3 years ago. So I would say we are becoming more aware. I think the government is understanding that there are more voices in this community that are shouting from the rooftop saying we need help. There's some amazing documentaries out there that are exposing a lot around Lyme. So I am hopeful we're going to have progression, and the Global Lyme Alliance is here to fund that research to ensure that we are making strides forward.
Amazing.
Great. Congratulations and kudos for
Thank
everything
you.
you've done. I mean, to go from where you were to be on top and putting all this energy and helping others is the greatest gift anyone can do. So kudos and thank you for being here. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Kenzie.
Thank you both. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
For more expert resources on Lyme disease prevention and treatment, visit the Global Lyme Alliance at www.globallymealliance.org. You'll find research-backed information, doctor directories, and ways to support the fight against Lyme. You can also follow Kenzie on Instagram at Holistic Umbrella. And if you found today's episode helpful, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, leave a review. Together, we can raise awareness and push for better solutions in Lyme disease care. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on The First 7 Years.
Thank you, Kenzie.
Amazing.
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.